In 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System released with Super Mario Bros., and it went on to revolutionize the home console market. Unlike the competition, Nintendo didn't view consoles as a flooding ground for lesser arcade ports, but instead saw an opportunity to develop much larger and grander games for the home environment. After just a few months, we'd get Metroid and Zelda and many, many more, and the rest is history. At least, that's our history. Over in Japan, the Famicom spent 2 years without any of that. Launching in 1983, the Famicom was still finding success being like most other consoles of the time, just with a much higher standard for quality. Nintendo had a vast library of arcade games, and while console ports of those existed prior to the Famicom, they were never this close to the arcade builds. To the casual observer, Donkey Kong was identical to what's found in the arcades. Excitebike brought a sense of speed we weren't used to seeing, and games like Pinball did their best to bring the arcade experience to the living room. As 1985 rolled around, Nintendo had sold 2.5 million Famicom systems. All this without any sign of the games we know it to be famous for. No Super Mario Bros., no Metroid, no Zelda. It was a success, but something big was coming, something that would change the entire landscape for the system in Japan. In February of 1986, Japan saw the release of the Famicom disk system. Due to discs being much cheaper to manufacture, the savings were passed on to the consumer. Not only were games cheaper than the cartridge counterparts, but there were also rewrite kiosks. For just 500 yen, you can rewrite an existing game with another one entirely. Storage capacity was also expanded. Saving was a standard. Where Western games use passwords, these versions saved right onto the disc, and many games benefit from improved audio. To further push the add-on, Nintendo ensured the vast majority of their first-party releases would ship exclusively on a Famicom disc. Most classics in Japan live in a very different format to what we know in the West. This was a new era for Nintendo's development structure, and that's truly what made the disc system shine. In terms of major first-party Nintendo games, 4 titles managed to release within months of each other, and to aid development, they came in pairs. It's been long documented that Metroid and Kid Icarus are sister games. They run on the same engine, had a large involvement from the same team, and there's even winks to their close development with Metroids appearing within Kid Icarus as a species called Komeito. One was a game of exploration, and the other was a linear platformer, but the two are very tightly knit and launched within just 4 months of each other. All of this is fairly common knowledge, but what you may not know is the Famicom Disk System launch title, The Legend of Zelda, also had a sister game. But where Zelda went on to form a deep legacy of sequels, the other game never left Japan and is still waiting for a second installment. This is the mysterious Murasame Castle. This game introduced Takamaru, an apprentice samurai who you may recognize as an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. In a picture of the day, Sakurai even placed Takamaru and Link together in reference to their unified development. On a dark and stormy night, Murasame Castle is attacked by aliens, and the statue Murasame is brought to life. The 4 neighbouring castles are also seized, with the daimyo of each being handed an orb, of which Takamaru needs to take down Murasame. To do this, you've got a few tools. If you're standing next to an enemy, then pressing B takes them down using a sword swipe. It's often the most powerful but risky attack, given you have to get very close. Keep your distance though, and you'll launch a throwing knife. There's an infinite supply of these, for reasons, and Takamaru can even power these up by finding hidden buffs. You can make them into balls of fire or make them spread shots. Occasionally you'll also come across a temporary secondary attack. One turns you invisible for a limited amount of time, and another summons a lightning bolt clearing the screen of enemies. Murasame Castle launched just 2 months after Zelda, and the similarities are pretty evident putting the two side by side. They were developed on the same engine, both have very similar HUD elements, they were both composed by the great Koji Kondo, and were both open, top-down games where you move from screen to screen. With the extra development time, Murasame Castle was able to make enhancements to the engine, resulting in a much faster-paced game. This is less about slowly exploring a world and checking every nook and cranny for secrets, but instead making your way through screens as fast as you can, taking out everything that gets in your way. The slower elements of Zelda are gone. You won't pause the game to change items, or farm rupees to get better equipment. A lot of that made Zelda the large and deep game it is, but much like Kid Icarus to Metroid, Murasame Castle doesn't necessarily play out like Zelda. Instead of one cohesive open world, Murasame Castle is more about level-based sandboxes. There's 2 parts to each castle, the outside level where you make your approach, and the inside where you find and defeat the boss. There's a clear beginning and end to every level, it's just about finding the path forward. Think of it like a Zelda dungeon. There's a room you start in and a room you end in, and along the way there's a bunch of other paths, and some of them are just dead ends. What makes this exhilarating though is how fluid the combat is. There's so much flying at you, but you have the tools to deal with it. It may look like there's a lot going on, but all the throwing stars being launched at you can be deflected using your sword. It gives off a really fast and visceral feeling of power. Zelda has moments where it can feel a little like a bullet hell, but Murasame Castle almost always feels like one, especially when you get power-ups like the spread shot. It's Zelda's combat turned to the max. Everything is so much faster, but that also means you can die a lot faster. You may have seen up there, oop, you've got lives. It's not too intimidating of a system. The game saves when you beat each level, so you never lose too much progress. But you still don't want to take hits. You can take 3 hits and then you lose a life. If you lose a life, you spawn back in the same room, only you lose all your power-ups, and that can make you feel tiny in the later portions of the game. You need spread shots, or at least I stood no chance without them. Every now and then you'll stumble across these rooms, and they provide an opportunity for extra lives. But that's only if they house maidens. Sometimes this transforms into a mask, and not only does it take a bunch of hits, but it follows you from room to room until you kill it. You need to be on high alert, and while it may sound punishing, it pushes you into a different style of gameplay. You need to always be on the move, changing up your playstyles, going close for a melee hit, dodging projectiles and deflecting projectiles. Remarkably, this Famicom game conveys the feeling of being a samurai better than most modern games. While I think Zelda is still incredibly charming as an open game, the combat elements do feel a bit clunky. But with the focus that Murasame Castle brings, they developed it into something so much more. Each level introduces new enemies and traps, making things get gradually harder and harder. Some enemies will start shooting fire, which can't be deflected, unlike throwing stars. Those statues from Zelda that shoot balls of energy, they're also here, and having them among the already high carnage action is intense. Occasionally you'll find opponents who are very tricky to hit, like this one right here. Getting something through their wall of fire is already hard, but then there's enemies spawning all around you, and oh, I want my mother. It's certainly a challenge, but slowly adding more and more threats means you again have to shift your playstyle to learn how to deal with them. It's fantastic. Once you've made your way through the 4 castles and have taken down each of their bosses, it's time to face off against Murasame. After filling their mouth with enough shurikens, you'll rid the world of the alien threat. And you enjoy 5 seconds of victory until you're thrown back to the beginning with the difficulty ramped up even higher. Oh dear. The mysterious Murasame Castle sold around 660,000 units, which considering the Famicom disk system sold 4.4 million in total, is a very good attach rate. It certainly shouldn't be considered a Zelda game, or even a spiritual Zelda game, but it's something those invested in the franchise's history should absolutely check out. In fact, in 2014, the mysterious Murasame Castle left Japan for the very first time, appearing on the 3DS eShop. That's the version you've been watching this whole time. Didn't release on the Wii U though for some reason, much like how Earthbound Beginnings was Wii U but not 3DS. Nintendo is strange sometimes. And both of these aren't on Switch, not even on Famicom Online. This year, the franchise celebrates its 35th anniversary, but unlike Zelda, which is always guaranteed a new game, unlike Metroid, which eventually always gets a new game, unlike Kid Icarus, which gets a game when the stars align, the mysterious Murasame Castle has never had anything else. It was a flagship title among the others, but likely due to its Japanese-only roots, Takamaru was axed as a Nintendo All-Star. But that hasn't quite stopped him. In 2004, Murasame Castle will be one of the 17 first-party NES games to release as part of the Famicom miniseries for Game Boy Advance, though 10 of these didn't get a global release, including this one. I just finished playing 2008's Captain Rainbow, another Japan-only release, but there's a near-complete fan translation out there. This stars Nick with his superhero alter ego, Captain Rainbow. People are slowly forgetting him and his legacy as new, cooler superheroes take the stage, and so Nick sets off to seek Min Min Island, a place that is said to grant wishes. However, he wasn't alone in this desire. Populating this island are Nintendo characters that time has forgotten, and they wish to be remembered again. My darling Lip from Power Upon, Little Mac from Punch-Out, who did get a game a few years later, Birdo, who swears for some reason, like they actually swear, and even Takamaru. Takamaru's story is one of the longest in the game, and it's weird. So it turns out Takamaru has a crush on Crazy Tracy from The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. Only problem, he can't talk to women without getting a nosebleed. So you help him by finding a bra and putting it on a mannequin, and then pushing him into it. And then eventually you force him up some stairs where you can meet Crazy Tracy, and it's a weird game, we'll talk about it more another time. Tracy wants to seduce all the men in the world, which is, again, still a weird game, and her favourites have been Mario from Mario Party DS, and Link, which is just his model from Twilight Princess. In the end, she declares that Takamaru should be regarded among them as the very best. Takamaru would also make an appearance in WarioWare DIY, but only in the Japanese version. One of the pre-installed games by 9volt features a microgame based entirely around Murasame Castle, although in the Western release, they just gave us Pikmin. They're not even kind of the same game. But things did turn around in the West in some pretty big ways. Zelda is often the franchise that's regarded as opening the gateway to Nintendo Mussos. We've had 2 Zeldas, Fire Emblem Warriors, and discussions for more are always happening, but it turns out Zelda's sister series beat it to the punch by 4 years. Samurai Warriors 3 for the Wii may not primarily be a mysterious Murasame Castle Musso, but it does have a separate mode called Murasame. Many interpret this as a remake of sorts of the original, but it's actually kind of a sequel. You start off as any character you want from the Samurai Warriors cast, and eventually, you meet Takamaru. He explains that he's from the future, and after defeating Murasame, both him and the alien were sent back in time 100 years, and Murasame has rebooted their plan. The setup is the same as the original. Make your way through each castle, defeat their lord, take the orb, and finally take down Murasame. But this is very much its own thing. After a couple of stages, you can take control of Takamaru himself, and it's crazy how close to the original this mode can get. Enemies from the game make their return, like ninjas who place down explosives, and there's even large projectiles you can reflect using your blade. Takamaru can even turn himself invisible, just like in the game, and many of his attacks are references to his key abilities. It certainly isn't as vast as something like Hyrule Warriors, but this was the West's first introduction to the series, and for what's just a side mode, it's surprisingly robust. As you get further in, you can even play as Takamaru in the free-play mode of Samurai Warriors 3. And then there's Nintendo Land, a celebration of their biggest franchises like Mario and Zelda and Metroid, even Pikmin and F-Zero. One of the Wii U's very best, and a really underrated party game. But if you played Nintendo Land, there may be one game you weren't too familiar with. Takamaru's Ninja Castle, a 4-stage on-rails recreation of the mysterious Murasame Castle. In this, you hold the Wii U gamepad vertically and swipe shurikens off the screen and into cardboard ninjas. Just like in the Famicom game, you can deflect incoming projectiles, and when enemies get close, you attack them with your sword. And that's a very cool detail. The Murasame boss fight is even replicated, where just like in the source material, you fill its mouth with stars. We've of course seen Takamaru in Super Smash Bros., who debuted in 2014 as an assist trophy. But we've also had a few tracks based on the game. One's even a brand new composition, and is one of the very best in the entire game. Finally, Takamaru appears as a sound effect in Mario Maker 2, marking his last appearance as recent as 2 years ago.
Let's go!
The mysterious Murasame Castle may sound obscure to a lot of us, but it was one of the Famicom's very best titles and stands as an important part of Nintendo's history. Fans of Zelda should absolutely check it out, especially if they have strong memories of the original. And while no sequel was ever made, Takamaru has lived a semi-decent life through cameo appearances. It's never too late to enjoy a classic, and this is one of Nintendo's very best. This is just such a special game, and hopefully if it wasn't on your radar before, it is now. So let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Have you played the mysterious Murasame Castle? And if not, are you going to? Thank you for watching, and be sure to go to that subscribe button and put it in Famicom disk system format and insert it into your Famicom disk system, which of course we all have, and I'll see you next time. Bye everyone.